Here is my official Patreon. Please join it because there are many stuffs that I can't share here because of community guidelines. But on my Patreon page, you will get adult Harry stories, Naruto, and Deca 2. Also the quick access for other parts of my story which might take time on YouTube. Also, there are many stuffs you will get here. Please consider joining my Patreon. Link in the description. Hey family, welcome back to my video. Today we will see, what if Naruto had taken Nami inside Lone Ship? Before we start, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the original author of this story. Your generosity is greatly appreciated. Now enjoy the video. Battles raged on the lower levels, sweeping toward the upper floors in a swathe of destruction that spared none. Those still locked within their cells. The prisoners that were either too weak or beaten into such submission that the thought of escape had become outright irrelevant, remained. Unable to escape the roiling inferno that devoured prisoner and guard alike, these cowards perished where they lay, curled into a defenseless fetal position in their cells, still others, screaming their defiance in their last moments. From levels 1 to 6, chaos reigned supreme, save for one. He had been flung on his face and chained to the stone slabs of the stairway. His arms spread wide, were weighted with links so heavy, he could barely drag his wrists off the ground. His ankles were tangled in a slithering mass of metal, bolted through a ring in the pavement, and as if that wasn't enough, a thick harness had been affixed to his neck, leaving his gaze almost affixed to the floor. He couldn't raise his chest to get enough air, even though he no longer had an indefatigable need for oxygen anymore. Nonetheless, he lay exhausted, the stone icy against his cheek. A silent tear of blood rolled down his cheek. How long had he been here? There was no window, no source of light or sound in this cell, but he was certain that it had been a terribly long time since he had last laid eye on the light of day or been blessed by the sight of the surface. How long had it been? How long since he breathed the fresh mountain air of his homeland? Confined, quarantined indefinitely from the rest of the world, from his fellow prisoners and brethren in captivity, he could only lay there, sleeping when his body would allow it, when the flash of manic hunger and insanity would subside enough to bring him sanity. Left here, left to rot with the pitiful facade known as peace, he closed her eyes and grimaced as another tear rolled down his cheek, carving a bloody trail across his visage. Bottom. He felt them before he heard them. Vibrations in the ground, starting tiny and growing until they shivered in his teeth and nerves. An explosion? Then noises in the darkness. The rumble of ancient machinery signaled the beginning of a procedure that was anything other than routine. Impossible. No one came down here anymore. Not after what he'd done to that guard. Perplexed by this sudden, but very much welcome intrusion upon his privacy, blue eyes creaked open for the first time in nearly a decade, scrutinizing the heavy iron door and the steady thump-thump-thump that resonated from just beyond the confines of his cell block. If that's you, Magellan, you can go fuck yourself. He cursed the words even as they left his lips, because only silence answered. I ain't no shitty shichibukai. I'm not coming out of here just to help you assholes clean up your own mess. Chains rattled harshly against the darkness, the thick gauntlets of steel and iron snapping taut as their victim tested his strength against the hardened locks of sea stone and steel. Trapped within this bondage, chin scraping off the dust-ridden floor for the first time in a long time, the gaunt figure forced himself into a kneeling position. He didn't want to be lying face down on the floor when that door opened. He wanted them to see that he was alive. Alive and kicking, even after all they'd done to make it otherwise. Whomever they were, surely if it was the warden he would have said something by now. It was growing closer. The sounds, grew with a steady pitch, drawing closer, closer than nothing. The opening of the gate shattered the deafening silence. He silently counted the clicks, leading up to 10, that would end when the gate would be raised, only to slam shut again. He counted past 10 and reached 15, and still, their sentry he supposed checking on his condition nearly every day, ensuring that he was still among the living, still able to ingest food, despite having lost all sensation of feeling and movement in his extremities. In the beginning he had shouted at them, demanded that they free him from his bonds, screaming and shouting and snarling until his lungs collapsed. When that didn't work, the door slammed in his face and he was alone, left to linger in the darkness of isolation. Time after time he shrieked, and time after time. They refused to comply with his demand. Soon, demanding had become pleading, but pleading never melted into begging. That fierce fire of defiance always roaring high in his eyes whenever he was presented with the brief light of a guard's torch. Whenever their constant beating didn't so much as break his will but his body instead. As always, that furious fighting spirit remained intact. Sweat slicked his forehead as the burning began, this time in earnest. Gripping the frosted links with one glove, he hauled his chest up and gasped in a desperate breath. A key rattled within a lock. It was that distinctive click-click-clack that alerted him to the coolant pipes that flooded his chamber with cold air, being deactivated. Almost immediately, he felt his blood begin to boil. Removed from that implacable chill, he shook his head slowly, like a bear emerging emaciated after months of hibernation. He rolled his tongue between his teeth and tasted blood. Well now, he wondered silently, who on earth would be fool enough to come down to this level and open my door? Though he had been freed from the frost, he knew there was no use in yelling yet. They were too far off and wouldn't hear him over the clamoring. Still, that burning, unquenchable thirst clawed at his throat, demanding release, insisting upon satisfaction. He gnashed his teeth and swallowed, the saliva doing little to placate the desert in his throat. The great and terrible desire for sustenance could be dulled, but never quenched by food and drink. He ached now, and so too did the threat, aching against the hollow emptiness of his stomach. He smacked his lips, running his tongue over his parched mouth as his senses began to return. I wonder. Now, when the iron lock did not slam back into place, his breathing took on an almost fevered pitch. Dragging his head around, he slowly shook dirty hair out of his eyes and saw how 3 parallel grooves in the floor arrowed towards the door. So it opened toward him. How the hell did it operate? A pulley system, perhaps? But before he could marvel at it further, the slab of sea stone he'd been lashed down to decided it wanted to lurch forward. Then he was dragged out of the darkness and into the light. The light hit him with such force that for a moment, he forgot herself. The sweating panic, burgeoned by the thirst, erupted from within him. He heaved himself up and roared, a terrible, wordless howl that shook him to the very core. Vast halls and invisible galleries swallowed it up. Fog hung in the metallic air. The gears that pulled his body forward clanged and groaned. Still he swore, the muscles of his neck, arms, legs, anything and everything bulging as he strained against his restraints and bucked. You are the he who devoured that accursed devil fruit? No? A flat, monotone of voice inquired with sudden inquisition. You are also the man who currently has a bounty of 500 million berry on his head, correct? The voice that cut through the agony was familiar. It gave him pause. There were few voices that he remembered from his captivity, but this one struck a chord. Somewhere deep within the foggy web of shadow and mist that had become his mind over the many months of his incarceration, he knew this voice. He'd heard it somewhere before. Where was it exactly? Try as he might, he could not put a face to the silhouette standing above him, the shadowy figure appearing content to await an answer of some sort. If I am. His voice was weak. It was a raspy, choking wheeze. Then destiny has need of you, his rescuer answered curtly. Surely you know this? Destiny has need of me? The prisoner cackled softly. Oh, that is rich. He shifted, testing his weight against the bonds, squinting with eyes hidden behind a jagged curtain of sandy blonde. Peering through the matted tresses of his hair, up at the speaker, blue became the most intense shade of scarlet, hidden beneath the crimson flush of his coat and harness. Shackled to the slab, unable to stand, he found himself staring into a pair of black obsidian eyes. Framed by an expression that was neither kind nor malevolent, he peered upward into an imperturbable visage. His rescuer returned the stare, as if he were inspecting a lump of worthless garbage, not a dangerous pirate who'd made a name for himself in the worst ways imaginable. The silence stretched between them before the latter yielded at last. Oh, all right, I'll bite. He spoke softly, painting a smile onto his face as he willed his body to relax. Just who the hell are you? Team? My name is of no importance, the shadow replied, exposing a small glint of pearly white teeth in the otherwise imperturbable gloom. Even were I to tell you it, that information is irrelevant. However, while we are speaking of names, surely you remember your own. This is correct, yes? You have an annoying habit of finishing your sentences with questions. The blonde snapped back. Yeah, I remember my name. But since you seem to know everything, why don't you just go out and say that, too? Mockery is not a suitable tone for this discussion, wouldn't you agree? The cowled figure was quick to abandon the smile, the smirk slipping ever so slightly as the cowl shifted to the right. Very well then, grandson of Edward Newgate. Shall we speak in a tone more appropriate for our audience? For a moment, just a moment, the face could be seen. Midnight black hair flung itself across a face in which twin tear troughs marred his features, nestled against those strange eyes of pure coal black. Slicked back to expose an angelic face, the man was clad in all white, an unmistakable but all too recognizable crest emblazoned into his cowl, furthering the suspicion that was staring at a deity of sorts. Newgate, smoldering sapphire flashed in the darkness. That name. I discarded that name a long time ago. Was that a hint of strain in the voice just now? Besides, I'm not all that fond of this big battles everyone seems to be ranting on and on about as of late. Scraping his gaze across the floor, he offered his bound wrists. Let Gramps fight this damned battle of his. Besides, it's not like this is any of my concern anymore. Not while I'm wearing these. He rattled his shackles uselessly. Then I will remove them. The cloaked man countered. If you would promise to leave impelled down, understand? So that's your angle, huh? He croaked, wincing as his voice cracked under the strain. How long had it been since he'd last spoken to another? Had a decent, humane conversation? The last time that he spoke civilly to someone was when? Exactly? Again, the memories of a life without bars escaped him, turning to mist between clenched fingers as he tried to grasp at it. Huh. He repeated, slowly, carefully poring over each word, dissecting every possible meaning they could give, before speaking them aloud. Release me. Very well. The man nodded, and in one swift movement, bent to a knee. Another high-priced bounty can be found on this level as well. His hand cupped the chained face, nudging it into the light. It was then that a lone chuckle escaped the prisoner, his whiskered cheeks becoming visible in the dim light. His eyes went wide with recognition. This man who looked, sounded, and acted as if he were Cammy himself offered only a smug smile as the key turned in HS shackles, the gears grating against one another as they were unlocked. He should be in the cell opposite yours, I think. The blonde dragged a low, throaty chuckle out of his throat. Well then, that's wonderful. It's been a while since I've had a good fight. You truly are bloodthirsty, aren't you? The cowled figure indulged itself with another eerie smile of reverence, banishing an errant thought in an instant. Yes, yes, yes. Gather as many nakama as you see fit, then hasten to the Marine headquarters, won't you? Half a question, half a command. The irreverent smile was met much scowling and skepticism. But if the blonde had any thoughts other than his own, he did little to express them. Leering up at his savior-to-be, gauging the reaction of that slate, gray face lurking just beyond the cowl, he chose his next words with the utmost of care. You actually want me to form a crew? He deadpanned. No way. Not gonna happen. The man smiled and broke the key off in the last lock. Surely you didn't think I'd release you for anything less, the man answered. I was hoping you'd released me just for the hell of it. The as-of-yet unnamed blonde countered. That earned a laugh from the masked man, who, having bent to tousle his hair, abruptly lurched to his feet. There was another sound now, the sound of footsteps descending the staircase that would ultimately lead them to the lowest level of impelled down. Accompanied by much shouting and hee-hawing, the blonde grimaced lightly as the intruder tapped his head. Somehow, the gesture of didn't feel at all condescending. Madara. Eh? The blonde blinked. You wanted to know my name, didn't you? The mysteriously cloaked individual smiled softly. Here, I'll leave you a change of clothes. That, and the fighting chance I've just given you. is all I'm capable of at the moment. We'll meet again soon enough, when the time is right. Oi, fare thee well then, Uzumaki Naruto. In an instant, the coils of frozen chains burst apart, their tangled locks flying in every direction, skidding across the pristine white floor. Deprived of his restraints, the blonde flopped abruptly forward, his eyes glazing over with surprise and shock. But his body, quick to recover, was already in motion. Before the shattered steel could even touch the floor, a vicious gale swept across the floor of level 6, scouring the walls and floors with a mindless shriek as a veritable hurricane erupted within the spacious confines of level 6 and spattered against the walls and ceiling. Satisfied with the level of destruction he'd wrought, the former practitioner permitted himself a wide grin as he closed a hand into a fist. Say, old man, but he was already gone. All that remained of him were his garments. The white cloak, a simple pair of trousers, and the red-vested shirt that eerily reminded him a little of a kainu. Both proved to be empty when he nudged the pile of cloth them with the heel of his boot. Slightly perturbed that he'd been so easily ousted, Naruto bent at the knees, only to inexplicably straighten in a second, scooping up the garments. He eyed them for an instant before he shifted, the tattered rags of his shirt slipping from his shoulders, removing his prison garb. It was worth a try. He scoffed. Oh well, whoever he is, I'll deal with him later. Shedding the hideous black and white prison attire, it took only a matter of minutes to change clothes. By then the footsteps had grown all but deafening, the sounds of soldiers screaming and guards groveling bouncing off the walls within a series of voices. Replacing his prison garb with the red-vested shirt, white cloak, and gray trousers of his mysterious rescuer, the individual known simply as an infamous pirate by the name of Naruto exhaled heavily. Well, that ought to do it. He mused aloud. Now then, I think it's about time I reminded those Marines just who the fuck they're dealing with. Scrubbing at a wrist with one hand, a harsh gale abruptly shrieked into existence. Even as the winds raged, as his body blustered within the breeze, his boots scraped across the floor. He paused after the second step, peering into a cell that was, indeed, adjacent to his own. Still the sounds of strife and success grew louder overhead, and still the scuffing of boots shuffled towards the cell. At the fifth step, his body inexplicably shimmered. He didn't slow his pace. Wavering, fading, becoming incorporeal, his body disintegrated. Without any rhyme or reason, he simply vanished, dissolving into the raging hurricane that continued to rock Impel down to its very foundations. Felt even in the upper levels, he smiled as those imprisoned around him yelped and whined in fear as the winds slashed and ripped at the steel, gouging and tearing into the murkiness that had defined his existence for so very long. Kamataiki, he hissed through clenched teeth, sound emerging from the nothingness. Suddenly, he vanished into the wind. Rather, he became the wind, a series of invisible sickles and destruction sweeping across the floor of the undersea gale. Battering back at the bars with a bestial intensity, the cage stood no chance before the force that besieged it. Creaking against the strain and the years upon years of rust it had accumulated, the iron was simply unable to stand against the sheer pressure of the vortex as it pressed against it and pushed it inward. Harder, better, faster, stronger. In short, the iron bars stood absolutely no chance at all. BAKRAM. In a second, the shattered steel crashed to the ground around the frame that had once been the door. Materializing into human form once more, the newly equipped blonde rapped harshly against the door with the remnants of a steel rod. A harsh clang-clang-clang reverberated across the floor of level 6, earning fearful whimpers from those who lay still imprisoned here. When the incessant racket earned no response, he cast the pole aside, thrusting it into the gloom that surrounded the inmate's cell. "Oi, bastard!" he barked, shouting into the darkness. "You alive in there? You're noisy." An unamused growl greeted him from the darkness. Wedged into the deepest, darkest corner of the undersea gale, walled off from the other inmates, he heard the sounds of crashing thunder and smiled. Smiled as a series of blood-curdling screams did the silence justice. Those who were damned and dying, filling the prison with a cacophony of mourning and wailing amidst the terrible battle being raged just above the upper levels. Slouched over what little remained of his cufflinks, he offered a mute blink as the latter thrust a key into the lock and opened the shackle on his wrist. "The kaze no mi," he spoke suddenly, regarding him through beady slits. "You're a Logia type, then?" Naruto grinned beatifically. "Why? Then who am I to lie to you, and Ai-chan? Don't call me that ever again, you piece of shit." This was exactly how the two most powerful men in the world would act. They wouldn't be surrounded by bodyguards in some iron fortress. They'd be completely relaxed in the world's most infamous prison, an iron gale from which no prisoner had ever escaped since its founding. Suddenly, the scene was no longer peaceful, the area of their own choosing. They were both weakened from years of captivity. They had no defenses, because they didn't need any. "Then what should I call you?" Naruto stared at the man. He said nothing. For a moment, he let the beast rise within. He had not lived through hell to be stopped by one man's impertinence. He would not be stopped. The feeling flew past determination to rage. The tattoo on his arm pulsated, and he felt his arm tingle. The man stepped back, testing his weight against the wall for a hair's breadth of a second. Sprawled amongst the rust and rotten dust, tickling his nose with ivory tresses of death, a lone youth could just barely be seen. He lay there, content to watch, to observe and remember, to carve the torchlight into the annals of his memory and life after death. Here within the prison of impelled down, smoldering scarlet seethed at the one who'd broken the lock, the one thing confining him to this place alongst the light. And what little remained of his patience now stretched dangerously thin. Observing the aforementioned spectacles from the safety and shelter that his cell provided, he schlupped to his feet and tried to stand. "Uchiha Sasuke." Naruto stared at him, and the words dried up. "Ah." His clothing was plain. The featureless white garb bearing only the slightest stain, a flecking of crimson across the collar. Throwing at this sole and singular blemish, the black-haired inmate reached for the scarlet spittle and dabbed at it with a finger, the digit coming away bloody. Clanking uselessly on his right wrist, the broken cuffs swung lazily back and forth as he dabbed his hands amongst the dew-soaked stone and dried his palm, diverting his attention from the quarry before his eyes. "I will remember that name," he murmured, the twin spots of crimson a veritable flare in the darkness, identifying themselves as some sort of stigmata or such. 3 tomo hung within those scalding scara of crimson, and he made no effort whatsoever to blink before this implacable opponent. Pausing only to yawn, he reached for the broken manacle adjourning his right wrist and snapped it in half as though it weighed no more than a leaf. He held little love for the cumbersome restraint. Requested or not, they'd already proven their ineffectiveness when it came to combat. "What's your goal?" The one known as Sasuke began warily. "Power? Fame? Fortune?" "Oh, heavens no." Pretending to be chagrined, the blonde raised his hands in weak irreverence. "I'm an introvert after all. I'm not interested in any of those things." "But," he paused, steeping both hands before his chin for what felt like an eternity to the brooding occupant of the ruined cell block. "If I had to name a goal, it'd be the utter collapse of the hideous infrastructure of corruption that both you and I know to be the world government." The silence was eerie. "Don't you have one?" Naruto asked, forcing joviality into his voice. "A goal? A dream? Maybe?" If this guy was going to be his nakama, then he had to know his motives and aspirations at least. For a moment, Sasuke didn't seem very forthcoming in that aspect because the silence continued to stretch between the shade and the revolutionary until it outright suffocated. Naruto silently counted the seconds until the intruders would arrive on this level, reaching nearly 30 paces before Sasuke finally acquiesced, loosing an exasperated hiss. 30 paces. I don't have a dream. He began slowly. I have a goal, because I will make that goal a reality. There's a certain person I want to kill, that I'm going to kill. He's my older brother. He killed my family. He took my dreams and aspirations, and he crushed them beneath his heel, all in one night. That man, I will kill him. My family will be avenged. Peering through steepled hands, he glared across the void that separated him from the wind user, the blonde squinting at him, his arms folded across his chest. 20 paces. All right, Sasuke announced suddenly, refusing to give Naruto pause. I'll join your crew. I'll lend you my strength, my power, my support. But know this, if you do anything to distract me, if you ever try to take me away from my vengeance, then I will kill you without hesitation. Do you understand me, Naruto? He paused, pushing emphasis into the final syllable as he awaited the inevitable reply from his former enemy turned potential jailer. 10 paces. Heh. Naruto grinned and offered a hand, his fingers just dipping into the expanse that separated the light from the darkness. Fine by me, Uchiha Sasuke. There was not so much as a trace of falsehood or deception in his voice as he smiled genuinely in answerment. It was at that very moment that a boy with a straw hat came barreling down the staircase. Naruto whipped around, confusion flying across his features for a moment, his attention misplaced, his hands still outstretched at the sudden commotion the lad and his two odd allies brought with them. Is this guy for real? Sasuke blinked stupidly, unable to believe his eyes, let alone his ears. Naruto? Huh? Was this guy serious? He'd been expecting a flat refusal. Instead, the pirate had extended his hand in friendship, an aspect of himself that Uchiha Sasuke had discarded long ago, and even now felt strange and accepting. Well, it was natural for a pirate to distrust another pirate. But Sasuke wasn't a pirate. Leading up to the day of his wrongful imprisonment at the hands of the world government, he'd been a simple blacksmith who just so happened to have an unnatural skill with the blade. Then everything had spiraled out of control once he'd eaten that damn fruit. Wow, what a strange bunch. Naruto's Mormu mercifully pulled him from his memories as he came back to himself. Well, whatever. Abruptly, his attention locked upon Sasuke once more. Do we have a deal then? He asked pleasantly. First mate Sasuke? Fine. Dusting himself off, the emaciated prisoner stepped out from the darkness into the light and clasped the hand that was offered. Having revealed himself, Naruto realized that Sasuke wasn't all that old as he'd initially suspected. He couldn't be no more than 20, though his guess could have been off by a few paces at least. Regardless, the most interesting feature of him, other than those baleful black eyes that could flare into strange scarlet at a moment's notice, was that he seemed to be already clothed, garbed in loose-fitting slacks and the more traditional cloak that most pirates had taken a tendency to wearing. Sasuke didn't look all that impressive. But for that, his chest lay bare beneath the loose sleeves, tracing across the square hilt of a strangely shaped sword and sheath. Now that piqued Naruto's interest indeed. Why on earth hadn't they taken his weapon? Or his clothes, for that matter, when they could have easily done the latter? It was almost as if the guards had been too afraid to strip him of his garments beforehand. I'll have to watch myself around him, just in case. Regardless, he'd just taken the first step to making a crew. Not bad, considering he'd only just been released from the 6th level of hell. Scooping his jaw off the floor, he returned his attention to what was quickly becoming a commotion at the far end of the prison. Sasuke followed his gaze for a moment and then dropped it, finding little to no significance in the boy who was screaming at the top of his lungs for someone named Ace. Naruto, however, blinked. Ace, huh? Huh. He frowned, abruptly noticing the straw hat the boy wore. Wait a second, that couldn't possibly be. I take it you have a plan to get us out of here? Sasuke asked, dragging him from his reverie with a cruel and merciless swiftness. The stairwell's been blocked up. Naruto turned his attention to the south, eyes flying wide in disbelief as he saw that Sasuke indeed spoke the truth. Someone had layered section upon section of the floor upon the staircase and effectively walled up the only way that would lead upward from level 6. When the hell did that happen? Oi, do you have a plan or not, Captain? Sasuke persisted, stressing the word captain with a slow deliberateness. Haven't you been paying attention to anything I've been saying? Naruto swallowed as he realized what Sasuke hadn't, that they were effectively trapped on the lowest level of Impel Down. To open the grate would release the sleeping gas. Even if he did manage to blow all of it away with his wind, was there no guarantee that the guards wouldn't just pump more into the prison? Naruto's sweat dropped. Actually, I was hoping you'd already come up with one. What? Sasuke gawped. Idiot. How on earth can you possibly be so? If you guys want to get out of here, set me free. What? Sasuke whirled, his hand instinctively flying to its sheath upon his sword. Who was that, just now? The voice had come from one of the nearby cells, and now the rattling of chains beckoned both of them. Exchanging a wary glance, the duo approached the bars. Sasuke frowned, peering into the blackness as they awaited some sort of reply from the mysterious stranger. The steady sound of breathing could be heard from just beyond the bars, but putting that aside, virtually no sound was produced. And why should we do that? The Uchiha frowned, heedless of Naruto's silence. Freeing someone like you would only impede our progress. I can create a hole in the ceiling. The voice cackled, its owner carefully hidden just behind the bars. What do you think of that, brat? Naruto remained silent for a moment, absent-mindedly noting the Straw Hat Boy and his two companions had finally taken notice of them. Furthermore, the arrogant inmates had captured their attention as well, and now they approached the bars of the cage. Naruto grimaced for a moment, trying not to recognize the lad. Rather, his attention was focused on that gleaming golden hook that glinted in the darkness. Only one man had that hook. Crocodile. For the first time since his release, Naruto's face broke out into a wide grin. Unfortunately, the Straw Hat Boy chose that very moment to say the exact same thing, and his was an all but murderous scowl that adjourned his face. Irked in turn by the sudden interruption, Naruto scowled anew, his attention fixated upon the boy. Blissfully unaware of the other's identity, immediately a terse standoff resumed. Hey, I was talking. Naruto growled dangerously. Know your place, squirt. Well, so was I. The boy snapped back. You know yours, idiot. Who the hell are you, huh? Naruto's left eye twitched. Other than some damn kid with a death wish, that is. Name's Luffy. Straw Hat answered defiantly. Who the hell are you? Luffy. Naruto repeated dumbly. Wait a second, Luffy as in Straw Hat Luffy? The kid with that big old bounty on his head? What? Your name is Luffy too? Luffy tilted his head in vehement protestation. Hey, that's my name. My name isn't Luffy. Naruto roared, a sudden gust of wind ejecting Luffy from their standoff. Deprived of his balance, the captain of the Straw Hat Pirates flew. Literally. He lost control of his already flailing form and was sent tumbling head over heels before he finally crashed into the southern wall. Rather, he would have, had he not rebounded at the last instant, his limbs stretching an impossible length as he ricocheted across the hall and came flying forward at an obscene speed. Whoever you are, I don't have time to waste on you. He hollered. If it's a fight you want, I'll finish you off in one blow. Goma no. Shit. Naruto gawped, dumbstruck as the fist thundered toward him. He is a rubber man after all. I didn't expect this. Jet pistol. Abruptly, Naruto's terror twisted into a sickening grin. Not. Luffy's punch sheared through the blonde, shaving off the entirety of his face and leaving a headless corpse behind. His head simply dissolved, leaving his neck and shoulders intact as the streaming and unstoppable momentum sent the rubber man sprawling across what remained of his inert body. Nonplussed at the sudden decapitation that had claimed his captain, Sasuke frowned. Then he blinked, because Naruto exhaled, lisping slightly as his mouth began to assume its proper shape and form. His chin soon followed suit, air streaming back into place and solidifying into flesh. As the ruined stump assumed the shape of his neck, as the neck regained physical form and sentience, Naruto scowled. Say, that actually tickled. Damn it. Luffy winced as he rubbed at a bloodied fist. I passed right through you. Of course you did. Naruto nearly face-faulted in the wake of such an obvious response. My body isn't a solid. I ate the kaze no mi. You dolt. I'm an air man. Without hockey behind your blows, someone like you has absolutely no chance against me. It's like swatting at a giant with a stick. You can't touch me no matter how hard you try. Shaking his head, he scraped a single digit across his face, fury flickering in and out of eyes that were sapphire one instant and scarlet the next. Stupid. You rookies are so damn stupid. Sasuke arched an eyebrow, an expression that Crocodile mirrored, his perpetual scowl deepening behind the bars as Luffy attempted to reclaim his footing. He wasn't fast enough. Even as he stumbled half a step, pivoted on his heel and turned, the wind was already whipping itself back into a frivolous frenzy. Wind. It was wind that swooped down behind Monkey D. Luffy, reassuming shape, form, and all the solid strength of one Uzumaki Naruto, an arm cocked back and wrapped within a shroud of said element. This kid. By the time Luffy thought to turn, it was already too late. Naruto's fist smashed across his face, and he was sent sprawling. He slapped into the ground hard, his body flipping over as he skidded onto his back. His head kissed an iron-hard root, and black spots swam before his eyes. Even with his rubber body absorbed the brunt of the blow, white snarled across his vision and burned the world white. Cold fury burned his world white as Naruto raised a hand and spoke. Monkey D. Luffy. He began ponderously. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? He didn't give the boy the chance to finish. Instead, his fist crackled outward, slamming into the bars that held Crocodile and shattering them as though they were naught but glass. 5 flicks of his right hand later, and the manacles dropped from the wrists of the former Shichibukai. You may have defeated my former comrade here, however, you can't hurt me, Unlogia Elemental. And I'm not even all that strong at the moment. That being said, just how on earth do you plan to deal with the other admirals at Marineford, Straw Hat? I don't care. Luffy shoved past him. Get out of my way. I'm going to rescue Ace. Naruto pushed back and Luffy landed ungracefully on his ass. You're the one in the way. He breathed, glaring down at the Paramecia-type fruit user. Leave the battles to the big boys, rookie. Follow us out of here, and you'll just be deadweight in the end. What was that? Luffy stiffened, his skin prickling as Naruto loomed over him. I'm in the way? You're in my way. I have to save Ace, right? Naruto interrupted harshly. You don't want him to be executed, right? Luffy paused. Oh, of course I don't want him to die. Ace is my. Naruto wasn't having any of it. Straw Hat, he announced flatly. I've no love for Portuguese D. Ace, but I'll cooperate with you for the time being. However, Sasuke and I won't be taking any orders from any of you, so don't expect any favors from either of us. Do you understand? Sasuke looked as though he regretted that dope remark, but made no comment, instead choosing to further Naruto's explanation, adding condition that caused even the great queen of queers to balk at in sheer trepidation. WHAT. Ikonov spluttered. Naraboy, you can't possibly think that's a good idea. No, it's quite the opposite. Naruto countered for his crewmate. We need strong nakama for our crew. They don't come much stronger than the 6th level of Impel Down. Casting his gaze across the seemingly endless expanse of cells and smiled, a predator in the gloom. Open each of the cells and then proceed ahead of us. This shouldn't take long at all. Seeking the stall in which Portuguese D. Ace had locked himself away from the world, his garnet gaze locked upon the now sole occupant of the cell. One flick of his blade later, and Jinbei found freedom. There, we've released you too. But the other inmates on this level belong to us, he announced. How does that sound, Captain? Sounds good. Naruto seconded, only to pause at the last instant. Naruto's gaze cut across Monkey D. Luffy, practically passing him up as it fell upon Ivankov. He hoisted the boy higher, his gaze sliding to Sasuke for just a moment as the Uchiha unsheathed his sword and drew himself into a readied stance. A ways behind them, Crocodile waited patiently, a sin-sider smile adjourning the features of his face. Naruto gauged them all, gauging their reactions one by one, before he rudely released Straw Hat and cast him down. But this is inconvenient. He frowned at the Queen of Queers, heedless of the boy gasping for breath at his feet. Ivankov, Grandpa told me you were dead. Hee-haw. The infamous Nukama bellowed boisterously at the baited insult. You of all people should know Whitebeard often embellishes the truth, Naraboy. Still, I didn't expect to find you here, of all places, alive and kicking no less. I thought you would have escaped by now. After all, not a fucking word about that. Naruto snarled, all venom and viciousness once more. Ivankov, I'm not interested in anything you have to say. He murmured, softer now, and turned towards Sasuke, the latter offering only silence and contentment as Naruto composed himself. That isn't your secret to tell anyone. Do you hear me, Queen of Queers? Before Ivanov bothered to answer, Naruto was already barking orders. Oi, crocodile. I won't force you into anything, but you're free now. So open up that hole. I've had enough of this eternal solitude for one lifetime, and I don't plan on having another. Pivoting on his right heel, he seized the defiant Luffy, hauling the fuming captain to his feet, and glared at the impertinent youth for a moment longer before finally releasing him. Get out of here. Are you deaf? I'm telling you to open the hole and go on ahead of us. He swept an arm outward as the sound of explosions grew ever nearer. You said you wanted to save your brother, right? You do anything to save him, right? So don't just stand around here. You know good dolt. Get your ass moving. I can handle Magellan by myself. Ivanov blinked. But Vayu know his poison will do absolutely nothing. Naruto tittered softly, his gaze sliding to Sasuke once more. Compared to my abilities. It was at that exact moment in which the staircase exploded. There they are. A stern voice shouted. Don't let them escape. Well, fuck me sideways. Naruto grinned into the smoke. Seems we've got company. Smoke sprayed across the stairwell, sweeping away the remnants of the sleeping gas. It wasn't long at all before the sounds of gunshots ricocheted around the halls, the constant pitter-patter of hot lead and bullets serving as a fine excuse for Crocodile to redouble his efforts and offer a hand to the ceiling. Scarce had he done so than Inazuma began snipping, his scissor hands slicing through the hardened rock as though it were naught but paper, carving himself a spiraling staircase that led up to the already decaying floor. Damn it! Luffy snarled as Crocodile lowered his hand and hook, satisfaction twisting across his face for a moment. We'll settle this later. Naruto oomphed in silent agreement as the group of five skittered up the impromptu staircase. Sorry about that, Sasuke. He offered his shoulders in a shrug as several dozen barrels leveled themselves at them. It seems I've already dragged you into an awkward situation. The Uchiha scoffed anew, his sword sliding from its scabbard moments later. Well, I suppose I could use a warm-up. Naruto's smile only grew as the approaching guards recognized him. Shit, that one's Logia class. Naruto flicked two fingers. Kaze no Yaiba. And the walls spattered with blood. Damn that windbag bastard. Luffy grumbled as they hurriedly climbed the cavernous staircase. I'll kick his ass for sure the next time I see him. Crocodile scoffed. If you ever fought him at full strength, you'd be dead in an instant. What? Luffy froze. It was as though his soul had been stripped naked and all the darts in the world had flown and sank into it at once. He struggled for breath, hyperventilated. He looked as though it were the end of the world and he would cry, scream, and roar all at once. But he did neither, his visage upturned upward in nameless disbelief and confusion as Crocodile leered at him. Disgust etched into his every feature. He watched his words wrap themselves around the rookie's mind, twisting his confusion into disbelief, and his disbelief into mindless stupefaction. What makes you say that? Crocodile didn't even flinch. This kid back there was that Whitebeard's own flesh and blood. Yeah. Crocodile offered his shoulders in a mute shrug. He's Whitebeard's grandson. A slash-in. Well, I got this idea after I heard Magellan was severely beaten. After what happened to Bon Clay, I just couldn't help myself. Yup, Naruto and Sasuke are forming their own pirate crew. Some will be found in Impel Down and some won't. And then it is off to the Marine HQ to fight a battle amongst battles. Each of them will have their own little harem eventually. After all, these two are hot commodities in Ant Universe they find themselves in. Naruto's Kaze fruit represents the element of the storm, pure destruction in the form of wind, rain, and thunder. It isn't quite the most powerful of Logia, but it is a Logia and is deadly nonetheless. Sasuke's curse's fruit isn't quite explained, but Madara's appearance, and likely that of Akatsuki, will soon be. Review this chappy and my blood, sweat, and tears, please, as I battle against this confounded sickness of mine. Enzi. Sonata, /n. Just another what-if story to pass the time while I have another nasty bout of health issues. Hope you enjoy the One Piece humor. Sorry if it is short, guys and gals. I'm just really having a hard time against my illness. Review pretty please. Life's a bitch, so if it's easy you're doing it wrong. Magellan was mad. It was practically impossible to tell just by looking at him. His eyes were only slightly wider than normal, his impossibly toxic mist only somewhat more visible from within clenched teeth, his eyes slightly wider beneath his disheveled cap and bangs. His shoulders were squared a bit more than normal as he folded his gloved arms across his wide stomach. To anyone else in the room, he would have looked unaffected by the sudden announcement that ran through the halls of Impel Down. What did you just say? But Vice Warden Hannibal wasn't anyone else. Only 3 beings in this entire universe had spent more time around the Warden than he had. And 2 of them were dead now. The third, Shiryu, was currently locked away from all of society of level 6, where all of the chaos was currently coming from. That being said, the news had gone through mere moments before, an instant before they'd lost all contact with the guard station on the 6th level. Now, his eyes darted back and forth between the stoic figure at the door and the dumbstruck form of their captive, one Portuguese D. Ace, who flinched as yet another tremor chased them up the automated lift. Whoever was down there, they were hard at work tearing the prison apart. Luffy. Ace choked back a breath. Part of him chuckled inwardly at the scene. He had known that there would be chaos whenever Luffy was involved with anything. But, what do you mean, Uzumaki D? Naruto has been released. Magellan's bellow conveyed all the disbelief, minus a tiny trickle of elation, that Ace himself was experiencing. That's impossible. Who was it? Who was the imbecile that allowed him to be released? I'll have his head. Having his little brother waltzing around on the 6th floor might just be enough to get the warden's blood boiling. Send all guards to level 6. Meanwhile, Luffy stumbled 3 steps forward, nearly losing his momentum for a moment. He dodged and twisted, sweeping aside a nearby guard, bluggery, anything and everything in his path as they rose up the staircase that would eventually lead them to freedom. He stared ahead, as far as his eyes would allow him to see. He could barely hold himself still. He bled from a dozen immeasurable wounds, and his head throbbed and still. He looked ahead. That guy back there, It's true. Luffy narrowly avoided the tooth-filled maw of an Arctic wolf as he turned to see who had spoken, the like of a blue fist momentarily filling his vision. The blow swept harmlessly past him, colliding with a hapless soldier and splitting the poor Cretan's lip in a spurt of blood that sprayed crimson viscera upon the both of them. Luffy didn't even feel it. I didn't know he was being held here. Jinbei continued solemnly. But his presence might be just the boon we need. As if in reply, another distant murmur rippled through the Foundation, furthering imbuing the weight within his words. As of right now, Naruto-kun is the only one capable of defeating Magellan. Oh oi! Luffy gawped. It took all his willpower to hold himself together. Another chamber of his heart compressed as he waited for the merman's inevitable reply. Running right now was like drinking liquor while hungover. It scratched and burned at his lungs, and though his feet threatened to leave the earth, still he flung himself ahead off the others. Unbelievable. Poison or no, that Doku Doku bastard had nearly killed him on one occasion. Now, somewhere in this prison, there was a guy who could actually defeat him? We won't have to wait long, Strachan. Ivankov announced abruptly, his unusually large cranium filling the rookie's visor for another instant, as they continued their ascent toward the stairwell that would eventually lead them back to level 5.5, aka the infamous land of New Kama. A ways ahead of them, Crocodile cackled mirthlessly. He's coming up after us. Even further down, around the men were dying horribly. Some were strewn across the floor down, splayed in a pile of twisted limbs. Others lay dead, with no indication of what had killed them. And still the lone guard assailed the wall with his fists, weeping and sobbing and spitting, all semblance of sanity already long since lost to him. His hands were bloody stumps, ruined, but he never, ever stopped. Many had been killed by one means or another, but some had been scorched with fire or exploded. The walls ran red with their fresh blood. The gate had been blown apart during their entrance, and two figures were wading through the dead and the dying. One of them paused, checking for survivors, scouring the filth and grime with what could only be considered as sheer disgust and disdain. Blood began to dribble from his left eye. Blood amongst the carnage and chaos. It ran thick and seeped into the floor at his feet, the steady pitter-patter causing his companion to frown. Saphiric gaze painfully torn away from the stain that spattered the walls and ceiling. Tears of blood, perhaps, almost as if he were weeping for those perished within the once pristine prison. His companion knew better. "Sasuke," he began slowly. "That's enough." The Uchiha smiled and said nothing. "Sasuke." Naruto repeated the warning. "They can't even stand up?" And still the wails of the dead and dying did not diminish from the 6th level of impelled down. "Sasuke, they're scum." Sasuke growled in sudden reply. "Just like him. And they're in the way." They were in the way, that is, until a geyser of heat swept down the hallway and consumed the cobblestones. Slow and inexorable, tendrils of flame, black flames spawned themselves from nothingness and crept across the floor. Dragging itself into the depths as though seeking shelter from the light, it sought those already dead and those still dying, and made no distinction between the two. Trickling down the staircase with an eerie precision, a low reverberation began to build on the lowest level of the infamous jail. Despite all Naruto had seen, he was thunderstruck by the horror unfolding before him. Gasping, choking, gagging, each of them eventually died. Eventually. Wreathed within a thin sheath of black flames, whomsoever suffered the fire's touch began to burn. And they burned slowly. The flames crept across the guards, the stones, the walls, and even the stairwell, consuming all that lay outside the cell block. All those who remained inside their cells were spared a grisly fate, yet forced to watch and witness the demise of the guards who had been their tormentors for so long. Nearly 5 minutes after the blaze began, it finally ended. Uchiha Sasuke sheathed his sword and then, only then was the black maelstrom truly extinguished. All that remained of the patrol were the ashes. Dust to dust and ashes to ashes, so did they return to the earth. With the last tongue of flame flickering into nothingness, the prisoners finally seemed to find their voices. One more, having taken note of the destruction these two comrades had wrought and shuddered. Granted, he was at least partially responsible for the bloodbath, but this was unprecedented. Well, he began slowly. "That's quite the nasty ability. Guess it's a good thing that you're my nakama, after all. My technique works only on the weak-minded." Sasuke amended brusquely. "Someone like you has nothing to fear from such a paltry illusion." Sweeping a hand across his face, the twin pinpricks of crimson doused themselves, vanishing with the subsequent lighting of a torch. Naruto spared the black flames a baleful glare. "That's not what concerns me." Sasuke smirked, wondering what kind of power that was just now. "Are you, Captain?" Naruto inclined his head mutely. "Well, if we're going to be comrades, I suppose I can tell you." Sasuke gestured to the flames, extinguishing them as his fingertips reformed from the flames. "You understand that there are 3 types of devil fruits, correct?" He continued at his captain's nod. "Paramecia, Zoan, Logia. My ability is all of these, and at the same time, none of them. You see, much like the Kaze no Mi, this particular fruit is ultra rare, and it wasn't easy to find. It's called the— What the fuck are you guys doing?" Sasuke choked aloud, irritation flaring across his features and making him fierce as he spun about. "That depends." He scowled. "Who the hell's asking?" "I am, dipshit," came the immediate reply. A pitched, feminine snarl, growling out from a ways behind them just beyond the bars of a nearby cell. "Now answer my question." Bathed in the dim glow that the torch provided, a pair of hazel eyes were revealed. "How the hell did you two break out of your cells?" Whomever lurked within that terrible void, they seemed to be incapable of keeping quiet. Much to Sasuke's dismay, Naruto proffered the torch from him and edged forward. "That's for us to know, and you to never find out." He countered. Damn you and your riddles. The reply caused both boys to cringe as if they were children. Just answer my question, you damn fucker. Naturally, this left Sasuke less than pleased. Why you? A hand thrust itself before his face. Oh boy. Naruto shifted, an amused chortle leaving his lips. Flattery will get you nowhere with us. Brushing past Sasuke, he approached the nearest cell steadily, nonchalant in his approach. Switching the burning torch to his right hand, he reached into his belt and exposed one of the many key rings they'd taken from the guards. He jangled them. But perhaps these might? He offered slyly. This earned an unamused hiss from beyond the bars. You know good piece of the keys. Some nameless inmate whined from somewhere across the room. Hey, you. Let me out. Let me arg. Uruzii. Sasuke murmured, annoyance flitting from his features. We'll get to you when we're good and ready. Dripping with blood and derision, his hand lowered half a centimeter, banishing what appeared to be a thin yet translucent column of light. A spear. Sasuke blinked and then it was gone, drawn back into the sleeve from which it had come. He blinked again, tasting the metallic tang of that which was burning flesh. Suddenly there came a wet squishing sound. Nigarg. A man howled as the stream of translucent energy retracted with a wet slurp that could not be mistaken for anything else. What the hell, ugh? The like of which could only be made by punctured flesh. A dull thud accompanied this thought, the sound spattering across the cells and shattering the silence. Suddenly, men and women were frothing at the bit. Screaming, shouting, and shrieking, they demanded attention, whining and weeping for their freedom. It was impossible to ignore. The very ground began to shake, quivering as the prisoner began stomping their feet and rattling the bars of their seals with whatever lay within arm's reach. It was an incessant din. Let me out. Yeah, me too. Me. I'll join your crew. Please. I'll do whatever you want. Naruto's eyes flared wide. All of you. Shut the hell up. Miles across the cell block, prisoners slumped into a boneless heap. Foam still gushed from some mouths, eyes remaining glazed, lifeless. With just a single glare, all those without willpower had simply passed out without a word. Slouching over one by one, nearly half the inmates of the northern cell block collapsed where they stood. The rest, a chosen few who somehow managed to keep their wits about rim and stay conscious, were instantly quelled. The silence was eerie. Hockey, huh? The girl chortled. Well, I'll be damned. I told you, flattery will get you everywhere. Naruto snapped back. Oi, you said nowhere. Not everywhere. Are you a fantasista or something? Naruto tittered softly. Perhaps, but, It was impossible to tell in the gloom, but for a moment, Naruto might have smiled. Sasuke arched an eyebrow at the irreverent behavior of his captain. Even more so when said Sancho dared to stick his arm into the bars, burying it within the blackness. At that very moment, the torch went out, plunged back into the dark which he so abhorred. The Uchiha muttered a black and condemnatory oath. A heartbeat later, and the torch mysteriously relit itself as his fingers curled around the damp piece of plywood. The hell? He was greeted by a rather interesting sight. What the hell was that for? She, for the voice was unmistakably female, spluttered out from within the cell. Don't just do weird shit like that. Naruto had not only reached through the bars, but he'd pulled his hand back out. There was no mistaking the hand which he held, nor the way in which the prisoner's fingers fisted against his own. In an instant it was over, the moment forever lost. Whomever lay within the cell shrank away from the light when he approached, his sensu's exasperated sigh confirming his suspicions as he withdrew his hands from the bars, his shoulders slumped against further intrustion. What the hell is he up to? He wondered into the gloom. Unperturbed, Naruto suddenly jangled the keys before the prisoner. Of choice once more. I think you just got your ticket out of here, Naruto said, his ever-present grin widening marginally. If you play your cards right, of course. See these? He jingled the key again, finding amusement in the sudden silence. I'll let you out of here. He cast his gaze to the other cells, as though contemplating the possibility of leaving her behind in favor of the others. If you promise to release everyone that is housed on this level, that is. If not, then. The silence was deafening. Oi, what was your name again? The voice asked after some pause. Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto answered readily, much to Sasuke's dismay. Idiot. Don't go telling everyone who you are. Naruto blinked. But she's a lady, right? As a gentleman, I have to introduce myself first. Tayuya. Both boys blinked, startled by the sudden revelation of their prisoner. She answered. She laughed. It was a deep, throaty sound. Naruto, huh? Firm and tart, the owner of the voice abruptly neared the bars. Well now, I've heard that name before. A pair of almond-shaped eyes leered out at them, framed by frayed tresses the like of which they'd never before seen. Scarlet. Her hair was a deep, piercing scarlet, as matching the color of the blood on her hands. The blood of the prisoners, Naruto realized, as he recognized this scent, the unmistakable odor of fresh blood. Sasuke frowned. Why did the name Tayuya sound so familiar? You boys wouldn't happen to be breaking out of here, would you? She asked. Quite. Naruto's grin was matchless in its intensity. Interested? Wait a second. So, what if I am? She snapped at him, pushing herself into the bars. You're not just gonna let little Olmi out of here for free, are ya? Sasuke frowned. Because something was wrong. One moment she'd been all but vehement about staying now. Don't open that door. Naruto turned the key into the lock. You weren't listening to me at all. Sasuke shouted. Don't just go releasing her without an answer. Yes. Seconds after the fact, a petite figure slipped daintily through the bars. Freedom. For a moment, Sasuke couldn't help but admire her. She was short, yet lithe. Her curves almost boyish, but her smile was all woman. She moved like a woman who knew what men liked and knew she had it. The starving, greedy part of himself stirred at the sight of her for a moment. Just a moment. It was enough. He'd never even thought about women until he'd been locked up. Before impelled down, it seemed he'd barely spared a thought for anything else. Now that he was out and regaining his strength, that old Sasuke was coming back. Lovely. He'd already allied himself with a pirate, and now, he wanted to fuck the first girl he saw. Once, he would have been shamefaced at such a thought. Once he would have thought a lot of different things. The irony of it made him smile grimly. Tayuya saw the smile and smiled back. For someone who had been locked up for Kami knew how long, she did look fantastic. Scarlet spilled down her shoulders, framing a perfect, porcelain white face that probably hadn't seen the light of day for many a month. Likewise, she'd somehow kept her original garments. The blood-red dress slim cut to her slim body, the dress torn at the sleeves in blatant disregard for fashion, ornate groom ties up the back, and a long expanse of leg exposed that was certainly not traditional but welcome nonetheless. It was completed with a stylish vest emblazoned with the traditional skull and crossbones, doubtless a Jolly Roger of sorts, into which her undeniably pert. Oi, my eyes are up here, Kono hentai. Shit. Sasuke coughed under his breath, raising his gaze too late. Naruto was there to greet him with a broad grin the size of a Buster Call ship. Tayuya wasn't quite as accommodating. Any vestige of fatigue vanished instantly. She laid eyes upon him and frowned. He touched a hand to the hilt of his sword, prepared to draw in an instant. Eki. 5 seconds later, Uchiha Sasuke found himself nursing a swelling red handprint on his left cheek. Naruto exchanged a glance between the two and laughed. Feeling better? Much. Tayuya groused. Thanks. I needed that. Ah, you're welcome. Naruto grinned cheerily. Here, give me your wrist. I'll unlock your other shackle. Thanks. Tayuya smiled all too sweetly. I'm grateful. Dope. Sasuke face-palmed from where he lay. Are you even listening? What was that, emo boy? Tayuya hissed. Sasuke made a small squelching sound. Nothing. Didn't think so. Rubbing at her wrist as the last shackle came free, the redhead offered an unamused snort. Say, Naruto, right? She paused in the rubbing of her wrists, sparing the latter a devilish grin the likes of which rivaled Lucifer himself. "Thanks." She clasped his wrist and shook once before the blonde could hope to respond. "I owe you one for letting me out of there." Sasuke nearly offered a comment of his own before his captain broke out into a loud laugh. "Become our nakama." Naruto replied with an abrupt grin. "Then we'll consider your debt paid." Sasuke sweat-dropped. "Oi, oi, you can't be serious." Tayuya's expression became dour. "Why on earth would I want to ally myself with you guys?" Dusting herself off, she peered upward at them, torn somewhere in the middle between intrigue and annoyance. "Che," she snorted at last. "Don't go thinking that my debt to the two of you is that important. I'd sooner throw myself back in my cell than work with two strangers." Naruto and Sasuke exchanged a terse glance at that, and Naruto was smiling. "Are you serious?" Sasuke took one look in the eyes of his Sancho, and he knew. Naruto was set on having the flamboyant redhead in their crew. "We know next to nothing about her. Furthermore, in case you haven't noticed, we don't even know how high her bounty is." "Bounty schmounty," Naruto shot back. "I don't even know what your bounty is, and I extended my hand to you. I think we can make a bit of an exception for her, too, right?" Sasuke eyed him cryptically for another moment. "What's your bounty?" he asked Tayuya. 400 million berry, Tayuya announced, albeit with a bit of pride. "What about you, emo boy?" "Oh, so you're only worth 400? Sasuke snapped, thumbing a finger toward his chest as Naruto arched an eyebrow. "Is that all? Try 450 million and 500 million. Bearer combined you." Dolt. Naruto had the wherewithal to offer a small smile in condolence, but Sasuke's expression was painted itself of pure scorn. And from the look of it, Tayuya was absolutely furious. Tayuya scowled, and he could tell she'd never thought of it. Combined, their bounties exceeded hers. It wouldn't take all that much effort on their part to lock her away again, either. Well, she wasn't a rookie pirate, because she clearly wasn't thinking like one. Sasuke watched the expected flash of confusion fade, twisting into a white-hot spark the like of which he knew all too well. "Fuckers," she grumbled beneath her breath. "Why would you want to work with me anyway?" Naruto sincerely hoped it was the latter. "You look like you're strong," he stated, returning his attention to Tayuya. "That's all the reason I need. I'd be a lot stronger if I had my flute." Tayuya groused to herself. "That bastard Saldeth. I'm going to break every bone in his body and pry it from his fingers." "Nanny?" Both boys blinked. "I'm a musician," Tayuya replied tartly, inhaling sharply in the same breath. "Clear out your ears." Somehow Sasuke had the foresight to brace his footing. It turned out to be a prudent decision, for in the next instant, they were all but blown from their feet. Naruto winced as a series of gashes obliterated the upper half of his torso completely. What the hell? Buffeted by an invisible pressure, the Uchiha barely managed to clamp a hand on either ear as a high-pitched shriek reverberated off the walls and ceiling, momentarily deafening all the inhabitants of Level 6. Tayuya was screaming. She screamed and shook her chains at the ceiling as if it were a symbol of every inmate's impotence and despair. She screamed at the very moment that the prisoners fell still. Naruto answered. "Sugoi." He laughed aloud into her shout. "Show us more." As if released by that sound, the winds roared. Lightning crackled across the floor, summoned by sheer friction of force at work, and the light painted Naruto black against the pseudo-sky. Black clouds swarmed in. How was that possible? And rain lashed down as cracks spread across the walls and ceiling, split by the force of her scream. Wait, she did have the force of a scream, but she wasn't screaming. Tayuya was laughing. She was laughing, crying, defying the lightning, her hair waving at the heavens as though it were conducting a wild chorus of rage. Screams arose from the cell block as never before. Tears shining in her eyes like stars, she began reciting a dithyramb of longing and loss. Abd a wind kicked up off the plinth, she sang a threnody to them, a dirge for the hope of a better life. The words swirled with the wind, and not a few inmates felt that not only the winds but the spirits of the murdered were gathering to her voice, rising with the cadences of vengeance. "So you've eaten a devil's fruit." Sasuke scowled. I should have known. Not just any devil fruit. Naruto frowned, thrusting an arm outward. Sasuke, this is demonic Sonata, she announced suddenly. Kurushimi no Kurasu. Chorus of damnation. What on earth is this pressure? With a sudden snarl, Taiyuya dissolved. Naruto faded from existence in that very same instant, leaving little more than a breeze in his wake. With an ear-ending shriek, a huge ball of light caromed off the ceiling and slammed into everything exploded. Taiyuya smugly wrenched her mouth shut an instant later, subsequently reforming herself and banishing the baleful scream. Warily, Sasuke unlocked his wrists, the banshee's snarl still ringing painfully in his ears. Surely Naruto had to be in a similar state, he mused. But as he returned his attention to his accomplices, he bore witness to an even stranger sight than Taiyuya's ability. Naruto's eyes were sparkling. You're perfect, he crowed. Absolutely perfect. One instant he was standing across from her, a trickle of water leaking through the cracked ceiling and spilling across his face. In the blink of an eye he lay 3 feet away. Sasuke followed his gaze with genuine amazement as the blonde picked himself up off the floor. Patting himself down off dirt and debris, he too was nursing a swollen cheek. Say that again. Flushed from head to toe, Taiyuya lowered her still steaming palm. I dare you. Unlike Sasuke's previous encounter, Naruto just laughed it off. Taiyuya, was it? Naruto inquired, struggling to a sitting position. I've made up my mind. You're going to be our musician. He dropped into a crouch and bent at the knees, straightening his body until he managed to bring himself upright. Our nakama. Once we get your flute back from Saldeth, you'll join us, right? Sasuke turned aside, feeling both jealous and guilty for it. Be baka. Taiyuya spluttered. Don't say freaky stuff like that. Sasuke couldn't help it. He felt just a twinge of sympathy for his captain. Give it up, he said to Taiyuya. There's no stopping him when he gets like this. What? Aghast, Taiyuya could only whisper. You do owe us. Naruto pressed. And if I say no? Naruto grinned. You must really like the warden, huh? Taiyuya blinked. What the fuck was that? Naruto kept grinning. Oi, I said. Naruto sat up. Logia or not, if you stay here, Magellan's going to get you. He dropped his voice. You don't stand a chance against him without our help. He grinned his foxy grin, and the flamboyant redhead felt her face flush anew. Come on, let's work together. In an instant he stood before her. His hand was extended, his smile genial. Everything about him radiated kindness and assurance in a way she hadn't known before. Nay? He offered his hand. Why, you don't know about my abilities. And those would be? Sasuke asked. Are you retarded or something? Taiyuya exhaled heavily. I ate the Odo Nomi. Sound itself is my weapon. I can kill entire armies with my voice alone. She closed her eyes for a moment, and for that moment, in the darkness, a small shiver ran through her shoulders. Just being near me guarantees your death. It's the kiss of death. Why can't you retards comprehend that, huh? Die. Naruto tilted his head. Aren't we dead if we stay here? Sasuke reciprocated the action. Baka. Taiyuya shrieked. Both of you. If you're going to be that way, you better not make me regret this. The smooth skin of her cheek brushed against his scruffy, whiskered one. Her hair filled his nostrils with the clean scent of delight and disbelief. She hugged him fiercely, the notes of strong, hard arms joining with supple, firm stomach and back joining with the pure feminine softness of her chest pressed against his, making a chord of perfect acceptance. Her hands locked around his cheeks and clamped down. Something warm and moist brushed Naruto's lips and immediately pulled aside. Sasuke blinked as he too received a similar gift. The sudden lil pluck altogether quick, fleeting and hardly enough to be made recognizable before the petite redhead yanked her lips away. Naruto choked aloud in confusion. Nanny? There. Taiyuya blushed, shamefaced. Immunity. And now, we won't have to worry about the two of you dying now, will we? Before either male could even begin to voice their protests, she pushed past them, the ring of keys swinging from one fingertip. By this point, the water had already begun to pool at their feet. In a matter of hours, what had once been a great undersea gale would be little more than rubble if the leak was not soon patched. Of course, as they eyed the long hallway of cells, that was the furthest thought from the mind of our three heroes. "Nice to meet ya, boss." Tayuya forced a sneer when Naruto's expression turned questioning. "Now, why do you say we blow this joint?" She swung the keys depreciatingly back at the blonde, the latter snatching them up before they could be lost in the rapidly pooling water. Eyeing the cell block filled with clamoring inmates, Sasuke only smiled. "I couldn't agree more. Next time, chaos, riot and impel down. Blackbeard versus Naruto. Magellan versus Naruto." Stay tuned. Next chapter will be the longest and best yet. Missed a slash in, well, at long last, here is an update to My Pride is a Hurricane. I've been fairly devoted to passing the torch as of late, and I haven't been able to dote upon this story as I'd have liked. So here it is then, my friends, the chapter that I have been promising you for so very, very long. Consider it a warm-up for Naruto versus Magellan and Naruto versus Blackbeard. And yet another surprise guest from the Naruto-verse joins the crew. Here you go. Life's a bitch, so if it's easy you're doing it wrong. Missed. Magellan was furious. Nay, he was beyond furious. He was enraged. His was a rage that seeped from his very bones. A fetid, fermented fervor that grew stronger and fouler with every step. Poison seeped from his every pore, splattering across the staircase as he descended to the innermost depths of Impel Down. Ordinarily, he would have used the elevator and arrived there immediately had it not been disabled by the very insurgents that besieged his beloved prison, one of which had already slaughtered half of the guards, freed a number of dangerous inmates, and currently had no intention of going quietly into that silent night. Magellan already had his suspicions as to the culprit's identity. In fact, he was quite certain of it. It was none other than the grandchild of the great pirate Whitebeard himself, Uzumaki Naruto. It had to be. But how? How on earth had Newgate's grandson gotten free? He'd been chained up with enough sea stone to sink a navy vessel. Was his strength truly so great that he had broken free of his prison? Or, and this Magellan dreaded most of all, had he somehow found a way to surpass even the powers of the sea itself? He found himself cringing at the absurdity of such an idea. No, that wasn't possible. The boy was strong, strong indeed, but he wasn't immortal. Not by any means. He'd been captured once before, after all, just barely. Now, as he felt the great undersea gale quiver beneath his feet, Magellan began to realize the true extent of what he faced, and in doing so, he realized his peril. This was not some sodding drunk who couldn't control his own power or hold his drink, as he hadn't when he'd first been brought to the prison. This was the grandson of Whitebeard that he faced. This was a titan, a god amongst men. He wielded the power of the heavens itself, and years of captivity had likely tempered his resolve even further. Who was to say that he'd not somehow honed his powers in the deafening silence of level 6? Who was to say that he did not possess some measure of his grandfather's strength and ability? While it remained to be seen, the likelihood that he possessed, or might eventually inherit, the powers of the Gura Nami was a frightening one. Unchained, the boy just might be stronger than Magellan was. Just like that, it began to sink in for him. Was it possible for the children of devil fruit users to inherit abilities that were not their own? No one knew who Shirohide's son was, whether he was alive or dead, and, for the moment, that didn't matter. What did matter was the fact that Shirohige had an heir. The man who was said to have competed with Gold Roger himself had a child who was capable of succeeding him in his old age. If he escaped his captors, that is, it had been difficult enough to capture him the first time, and he'd been drunk as a dog. Even then, it had been no mean feat to capture Whitebeard's only known offspring. It had been a pitched battle, and victory had only come at a great and terrible cost to the world government. That day, the mole they'd planted in his crew had come to them, had alerted them, the Marines, to his presence and his fortunate lack of sobriety. Unfortunately, Naruto hadn't gone quietly. Back then, It had taken an admiral to bring him down. Back then, he'd taken out score upon score of Marines, even going so far as to critically wound Admiral Akiji before they'd finally had sea-stone shackles slapped on him. He was strong. Of that, Magellan had no doubt. In fact, Magellan strongly suspected that, should he confront the wielder of the Kaze Nami a second time, the circumstances of their last battle would be greatly reversed. Somehow, the boy had grown stronger. Even here, on the stairs leading toward level 2, he could hear the tormented shrieking of his men. It was a hideous, gut-wrenching sound. They screamed, and it was like a thing possessed, snapping and snarling and snickering at him, mocking Magellan and his every achievement, his every goal, all that he had aspired to in the course of his life, and now, all that he had failed to do. Fury washed Magellan to his toes. He would not allow it. He refused to allow that impudent whelp to sully the reputation of the world's most impenetrable prison. Methodically, he traps down the steps that would eventually lead him to the perpetrators, fighting against his own treacherous bowel movements. Facing down, Newgate's dread offspring be damned, if only he could combat his own diarrhea with such ruthless efficiency. Ah, if only. Meanwhile, on level 5, Tatsumaki, a wicked and wild wind tore through the snow of the 5th level of the undersea gale that was impelled down. It scoured the stones clean, spiraling, sweeping and sundering the rank-and-file guards that stood in its path. They raised their weapons, some of them, but soon realized that there was little they could do against the destructive forces of nature that assailed them. Instead, they were swept away and across the cobblestones, tumbling head over their heels and crashing into their fellows at the bottom of the stairwell. They flew. Literally. One moment their feet had been firmly planted upon the frozen tundra. The next, gale-force winds drove them back, casting them about like so many leaves in the wind. There was no chance of victory for them here, and yet, in their foolishness, they persisted. Some screamed, uttering great and terrible oaths as the unstoppable forces of heaven took them in their sway, spending the last instants of their life in flailing futility. Others were smashed against the rocks again and again and again, until there was no life left in them and they stopped resisting. Arms were raised, then rattle as the invisible force broke upon them like a great and terrible wave. Broken bodies skittered across the ice, unable to prevail against the imperious elements that assaulted them. When they finally found purchase upon the ice, it was already too late to do anything but be beaten into submission amidst the snow plains of level 5. When the wind finally subsided, ruination surrounded them. It was the calm amidst the storm, a calm that did not last all that long as the trio moved on to the next contingent of guards, barring their entry to the cells that they sought. The unlucky few that managed to survive the initial surge soon found themselves wishing they hadn't. A terrible keening sound split the silence between them and the dark, causing their eyes to wither and their ears to bleed as a terrible threadnity wedged itself into each of their minds. One by one they went mad. One by one they toppled, left to splatter across the floor of the prison, each of them, like so much refuse. The ice split beneath this supersonic peal, dragging the unwary to their doom. Any that had survived that, well, let us say that Uchiha Sasuke was a great deal less accommodating than his traveling companions. He flicked his wrist. Once, twice, then thrice, and many that still drew breath abruptly did so no longer. Some fell, their heads lolling unnaturally to one side, broken. Others tried to evade his blade, but they were far too slow. Still others managed to survive long enough to bring their weapons to bear, aiming, tracking him with their rifles, only to meet a similar if less grisly fate. It was a massacre. There was no mercy given, no quarter offered. Whomsoever dared to bar their path was summarily cut down, be they innocent or guilty. "I'm not in the best of moods right now," he murmured, his words little more than a whisper. "If you attack me, I won't show any mercy." And a moment later, a dozen black-fletched flames pierced the man's heart in recompense for his temerity. He fell, still burning, gagging and gasping and groveling as he burned from the inside out. Before such a sight, the guards quailed in their coats, helpless to anything but watch. Watch as their fellow guardsmen died. Watch, as he was slowly devoured by the slow burning flames, his screams falling abruptly short as the blaze reached his lungs, turning them and the rest of him to ash. The Uchiha turned, regarding those that remained with a blood-red iris. To stare into those eyes was to stare into the face of death. To stare into his eyes was to stare back at the gruesome creature of bone and fire that loomed over him like a second skin. Well, it certainly didn't inspire confidence now, did it? Sasuke raised his blade and the burning skeleton complied, mimicking the move as if it were its own, wielding its own weapon of blazing violet violence. Sasuke waved the blade about ponderously, as if testing its weight, then scowled. "I'll say this once, and once only." He began slowly, drawing out every syllable. "Run, run, away. Now, if you don't, I'll slaughter you. Each and every one of you. Captain's orders be damned." The captain in question coughed at that remark, but it was already too late. The Uchiha's bloodlust was palpably obvious. If these men did not flee, then they would die. Most likely they would die whether they fled or not. The latter remained to be seen. "I said beat it," Sasuke snarled. "Hi!" The guards squealed as one, bolting over the drifts with such speed that it left one to wonder why they had not fled earlier. Within seconds, they were well out of sight, leaving little more than a cloud of dust in their wake, much to the amusement of the Uchiha. Not so much for his companions. Naruto, garbed in a warm fur cloak, stomped a few yards through the snow, shuddered from the cold, and frowned. Regardless, with their retreat, level 5 was clear, for the moment. "Damn it, Sasuke." Naruto moaned loudly. "You overdid it again. I mean, I'm glad you didn't kill them all, but the keys, man. You could have at least taken the keys. How are we supposed to open their cells without the friggin' keys?" "We cut them open, of course," Sasuke said, thumbing his katana's hilt. "What is it with you and the cutting, huh?" "It's what I do," Sasuke said simply, as if this somehow explained everything. "Remember?" Naruto sighed. Honestly, Naruto was exhausted, filthy, and hungry. He and Sasuke, along with Taiyuya, had thoroughly explored all the cells leading up to level 5. Amongst them they discovered a fair share of infamous criminals. Most of them lay face down in the ever-growing pool of water. The last one had a dreadfully irritating ability, but they had been dealt with much like the others, and now they too joined them in the blissful blackness of sleep. Now, after a short stop at level 5.5, they had come here, at last, to level 5. It was here that he'd hoped to find their next crew member, but, thus far, most of them seemed to be either frozen, unwilling to leave their cells, and those who had, well, they hadn't lasted through initiation. Which, of course, left Naruto several crew members short of a crew and very, very displeased. He still wanted a cook, a navigator, a shipwright, a sniper, a doctor, oi, before he could further imagine the potential grandeur of his would-be crew. The sound of chattering teeth dissuaded him from his own imagination. He turned, half expecting, half dreading that another pack of wolves had come out of the forest. Instead, he found only Sasuke and Taiyuya, the former seemingly unaffected by the cold. The latter, well, the latter wasn't faring quite so well. "Are the two of you quite done?" Taiyuya hissed through chattering teeth, wrapping herself tightly within her own fur jacket. "I'm freezing my tits off out here. Now there's a sight I'd like to see." Sasuke snorted, silently bringing up the fact that he, and he alone, had elected not to wear winter gear of any sort. In fact, he hadn't even changed his attire since they'd returned to level 5.5. Much like the rest, Naruto and Taiyuya had immediately chosen heavy fur coats for themselves, and both had bemoaned the lack of warmth ever since they'd reached the 5th level of the prison. Not Sasuke. Fuck you. Taiyuya snapped back, flushing. "You dickless prick. You'd like that, wouldn't you?" Sasuke retorted snidely, taking no small pleasure in his vicious reply as the flustered redhead darkened, cheeks and all. After that, Taiyuya fell strangely silent and would speak no more on the subject, leaving the unlikely duo to press on in deafening silence as she pushed on ahead of them. For a moment Naruto held a small fear that they might lose her in the blizzard. as she dipped in and out of sight. Thank the maker for her flaming red hair. All right, I can't believe you're dressed like that, Naruto said at last, desperate to breach the impenetrable void that stretched between the three of them. Aren't you cold? Not at all. Naruto gawped. Not even a little? Sasuke shook his head. Nope. Why? It's thanks in part to my ability. A trace of pride entered Sasuke's voice. My cursed fruit renders me immune to the cold. So it keeps you warm, is that it? Naruto drew closer, sensing a story behind Sasuke's answer. That's why you haven't said anything? No, actually Yes, yes. Tayuya pushed between the two of them before Sasuke could elaborate further. Sasuke is big and strong. Now, if you're done stroking your ego, Uchiha, I think I might have found what we were looking for. She stormed off again before either could protest, an annoyed look on her face. Above, the wolves howled plaintively, drowning out her plentiful expletives and other oaths that would make even a hardened sailor flush like a schoolgirl. Both boys blinked as the unamused redhead laboriously clomped up yet another drift and imperiously pointed into the distance. Shrugging, they had little choice but to follow, her down the rise and up again. Then, and only then, did they see that which she had been speaking of. As they joined her on the small hillock, it was impossible not to. What had this been doing out here, all by itself? They were staring at a cell. Is it this one? Tayuya pointed towards a lone remaining cell, little more than a hardened block of frigid ice in the frozen tundra. Ivankov had insisted that they free a certain prisoner, and he'd been so adamant on the issue that Naruto had taken it upon himself to, once again, stay behind and seek them out in the hopes that he might find additional recruits for his crew. Granted, he had a swordsman and a musician already, but what he really wanted was a cook. He wasn't going to say that aloud, of course. The last time he'd done so, Tayuya had practically laid him out with an ear-piercing. Who knew the girl could yell so loud, shriek? So he pretended that his main focus was finding a navigator, hopefully one that could cook, and pushed his way through the drifts, trying to drive some semblance of warmth back into his boots as he traversed the distance between them and the cell. He didn't get very far. Well, hello, handsome. A woman's voice arose from the darkness that encompassed the bars within, clear as a clarion bell. What brings you to my humble abode? Abode? Sasuke dubiously inclined his head a fraction of an inch. This is who we're looking for? Clearly, he was unimpressed. Sorry, I don't think Tayuya's withdrew her elbow from Sasuke's stomach slowly. Very slowly, allowing the Uchiha to feel the full extent of the pain plugged into his ribs. The Uchiha offered a mute groan of protest, but said nothing more and did not retaliate in the slightest. Naruto ignored their antics, and not just because of the easy familiarity that they'd settled into as they left level 5.5, because that had come naturally. Speaking of natural, greetings. Naruto had managed to stammer out, before he likewise found himself entranced. She was naturally beautiful. A beautiful woman with flame-colored curls and dressed in simple white and black prison garb, sat cross-legged behind the bars. Her shirt was half ripped from her body, and only her voluminous hair stood between her bare breasts and the bitter cold. Likewise, her clothing was filthy and blood-stained, but none of it seemed to be hers. She looked up at Naruto, also covered in blood, with eyes so incredibly green, he couldn't look away. She waited patiently as the blonde struggled to regain control over himself, his eyes his mind, and still, she peered at him, staring with wide orbs of brilliant jade hidden behind the bright orange tresses of her hair. It sounds like Ivan-san is causing quite the ruckus out there. She smiled thinly. Has he finally sent someone to break me out? You know Ivankov? Naruto asked, stunned. She laughed. It was a soft, chiming sound. Leaning forward on her haunches, she regarded the newcomers with thinly veiled amusement, an emotion that gleamed within her green eyes and set them a-smoldering. It took all of his strength to tear his gaze away from hers, and then, like a siren's call, her voice dragged him back. Do I know him? The woman laughed. I'm his little sister. Of course I know him. Everyone's sweat dropped. Sister? Ivankov had a sister? Unsurprisingly, This was difficult to believe. When the term Ivankov's sister came to mind, the mental image they'd conjured was not this. Not this graceful waif of a creature that sat before them, patiently awaiting their judgment. The results were, and for what possible reason should we want to release you? Tayuya scowled. Just because you're the sister of that queer, it doesn't guarantee anything. Tayuya, Naruto cried out in disbelief. You can't be serious. Look at her, she replied. She'll only slow us down. Sasuke nodded his agreement. I hate to say it, but she has a point. If this woman doesn't have any skills, then why should we bother to bring her along? Because it's the right thing to do. Naruto insisted. We can't leave her here. And why not? Tayuya asked sharply. Give me one good reason we shouldn't just leave her here. Naruto paused, taken aback by the lack of anger in his comrade's tone. Be because she'll die. That's your reason? Tayuya spat scornfully, the saliva already frozen before it reached the snow. She's probably totally useless. Could you please not talk about me as if I'm not here? The woman's voice settled upon them like a gentle mist, doing little to settle their frayed nerves, but demanding their attention all the same. And do not treat me as if I am some worthless wench. Her voice hardened abruptly, her teal gaze no longer softer, but hard and piercing. Apparently, this woman was not as weak as they had been led to believe. Not in the slightest. Inexplicably, her gaze fixated upon Naruto. You there, boy? She began sternly, abandoning all manner of flattery. Unlike these other two, you seem to care for my well-being, do you not? Naruto blinked rapidly, suddenly aware that she… Well, yes, I suppose I do. Then I have a proposal. Proposal? Naruto didn't like the way she'd worded that. What sort of proposal? Those eyes of Jade softened, somewhat strangely. There's a certain ingredient I'm searching for. Ingredient? Naruto blinked. What ingredient? One that exists in the new world. The woman explained. It's been my dream to find this ingredient. Unfortunately, I cannot accomplish this goal while I am imprisoned here now, can I? She shook her head dismissively. No, of course not. Therefore, my proposal is this. Free me, and I will be yours, so long as you let me search for this ingredient, as I please. What? If you set me free, I will render my services to you. The way she said services caused Tayuya to frown. Services? What possible services could a harlot such as she hope to offer other than the obvious? Surely Naruto wasn't considering allowing her to join them solely for that, was he? If so, then clearly, she'd overestimated him. A trickle of doubt wormed its way through her thoughts. Perhaps she should have stayed in her cell after all. At least it was warm there. At least it was safe. At least there, she didn't have to watch while Naruto fawned over this slut. Wait. Where the fuck had that come from? Wait, what kind of services are we talking about? Sasuke interjected, unknowingly saving Tayuya from further embarrassment. I'd at least like to know what you are capable of before we consider taking you along. Well, I offer much. The woman began. But if you're wondering about my skills in combat, then let me assure you, I am more than capable of defending myself. I appreciate your sentiment, however. Against Sasuke's stuttering protestation that this was not what he had meant, she continued, I'm handy in the kitchen too, if I do say so myself. If by service, you wish to inquire of my culinary skills, then just a moment. Naruto shouted over the blizzard, his eyes wide and gawping. Did you just say what I think you said? Yes. You can cook? Naruto all but drooled. You can cook food? Sasuke groaned. Great. I don't suppose you can prove it now, can you? Tayuya face-faulted, both at her own stupidity and the woman's response. Why, of course, darling. She smiled benevolently. I've eaten the kiri no mi. A harsh gasp went up at the mention of that. But if Terumi was at all concerned by the sudden scrutiny, then she did precious little to show it. Instead, she steepled her fingers together and leaned forward even further until the bars finally prevented her from risking the wrath of the frozen manacles binding her wrists and legs. Still, she was almost close enough to touch, and certainly close enough to whisper. Simply put, dear boy, I'm a mist woman. Ah. Naruto inhaled sharply, and Sasuke flinched as if he'd been struck. Of the three, Tayuya alone did not react, at least not verbally. Her eyes hardened and became stony, an expression most unfitting for such a beautiful vixen. Sasuke noticed this, but said nothing. Despite the mild animosity that he bore her, he did not feel that it was his place to force his opinions upon a fellow crew member, even when was contemplating the many means by which she might kill their captain. She comes, Naruto declared loudly, utterly oblivious to all that had just occurred. And that's final. Truly? The woman asked. Truly. Naruto laughed. Such was his joy. But who are you, exactly? My name is Meitarumi. The woman said with a smile that could melt ice. It'll be a pleasure serving you, Captain. Naruto felt his cheeks darken. Why yes, well good that. He waved at the cage of ice which entrapped her. Now, stand back. Well back. She complied. He flicked his fingers, once, twice, thrice, and the bars to her cell shattered like so much broken glass. Seconds later, her now sundered shackles fell to the wayside. Gawping, the woman flexed her fingers, watching them move and form a fist, then unclench again. She smiled. She laughed and her shoulders sagged, as if she'd been relieved of some great and terrible burden. Naruto, was it? She gasped between breaths. Thank you. 1,000 times, thank you. You've no idea how much this means to me. With his help, she found her footing. As she stood up, she attempted to keep her tattered shirt together, much to Tayuya's dismay. It was hardly possible. Naruto removed his fur coat and put it around her shoulders, and Tayuya felt her face burn when the woman did not comprehend his actions. Instead, Mei stared at him with confusion and tried to get away from his cloak. There's no need. She began slowly, perplexed by his actions. I'm quite warm already. Please. Naruto insisted, trying to ignore the thin line of blood leaking down his nose. I insist. He could feel Tayuya's gaze, such was its intensity. It bored into his back and threatened to turn him to stone. Should he turn to face her? Should he attempt to offer some manner of explanation? Best to keep silent, then. Kami, what had he done to anger her this time? Reluctantly, Mei allowed him to close it around her, and unlike Tayuya, she did not blush, nor did she look away. Ironically, Naruto found himself staring, not at her eyes, but at her neck, at how gracefully it flowed into ample cleavage only barely concealed by the cloak. She seemed like such a delicate creature. How had she survived, alone and all but forgotten amongst the frozen tundra? And why was she smiling so suddenly? Well now, aren't you the charmer? When he raised his gaze, Mei was suddenly a great deal closer than he remembered her being. Lending your coat to a lady. She paused, tilting her head as she regarded him amidst the snow. She reached out and silently ran a slender finger from his exposed bandages up along his chest. His skin shuddered and shivered where she touched, and he gulped. It was the only sound, save for the braying of the wolves in the distance. And yet their faces were only inches apart. Naruto was breathing heavily, every breath wafting past his lips in a thick cloud of steam, and he was beginning to regret his decision to forego his cloak, but still couldn't bring himself to look away from her. Even her smell was intoxicating, like a rare flower that only bloomed in the darkest gardens. Despite all the time that she must have spent in that cell, she was enticing and sweet without being cloying. You're kind of cute, Mei whispered, and Naruto felt his cheeks burn. Her very touch suffused him with warmth, a warmth that drove the chill from his veins and left him twice refreshed and energized. It was as if it were a warm summer day that enveloped him here, not a bitter, frigid winter contained within the world's greatest prison. She breathed, and her breath was a good deal warmer than it should have been when she finally spoke again. Say, you wouldn't happen to be married now, would you? Naruto gawped, the moment forever ruined in his eyes. Sasuke snorted. Such was his disbelief. What? Tayuya shrieked. What kind of question is that? The kind of question a woman asks a man. Mei replied matter-of-factly, pausing only as an afterthought. Oh, I'm sorry, is he yours? And no. The redhead spluttered defensively. Not at all. Oh. May blinked. Pity. He's quite the catch, though if you ever wanted him, I'd be more than willing to share. Tayuya felt her entire body darkening. A deep, cherry red. Absolutely not. Well, we could always fight for him if you really want. I'm not fighting you. Ladies. Naruto whined. Can we, please not discuss this? Here? Now? Ever? He shot a plaintive glance toward Sasuke, but the Uchiha was already gone. Moving on ahead of their little group, shaking his head and muttering incoherently to himself all the while, he paused only when the cries of his captain grew desperate. Tapping the hilt of his blade across his shoulder, he offered an exasperated sigh and came about. Captain, he began. Choosing his words carefully, he knew well when to avoid the wrath of women very carefully. I hate to interrupt, really, I do, but shouldn't we be on our way now? We're going to fall behind Ivankov and the other escapees at this rate. At the mention of the infamous Nukama queen, all notion of romance was abruptly perished on the spot, like a dried, withered flower in winter snow. Oh, that's right, May murmured, as if only now recalling it. I wonder how Ivan-san's been. Perhaps we should go after all. Yes. Shuddering, Naruto wriggled away from May before he could be ensorcelled further. Right away. It could be noted that he practically sprinted from Tayuya and May, or was that just his eagerness to escape at work? Regardless, he'd soon outdistanced even Sasuke himself, leaving the rest of his crew hard-pressed to follow, let alone keep pace with their determined captain. Tayuya slapped a hand to her forehead and willed the last remnants of a blush from her face. Men. And that was only the beginning of Naruto's troubles.